welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a little bit of a gaming video. We're going to be ranking all of my handhelds. I have a decent number of them. I've been collecting handhelds for about as long as I can remember, since I was a kid when I got my very first one. And I'm super passionate about it to the point where I've even like opened up, reshelled certain ones. I've made one, but we'll get into that. But I love handheld gaming. I've always loved handheld gaming, even up to the Switch, which I know you could argue is a hybrid of the two. But and today when we go over the Switch, we're just going to be ranking it solely on handheld. There is another one on here which you could argue isn't necessarily a handheld, but I use it primarily in handheld. Either way, today we're going to be going over the rules. Are basically I'm going to be going over how it feels in my hand, the game library, and how often I'm using it. And we're going to be ranking it on 1 to 6 stars. And when we're done, we'll go over and I'll tell you which ones are my favorite, regardless of ranking. But I have a pretty massive library. Some of these I even have multiples of, but we'll just start it off really quickly. This is what we're going to be reviewing. So first on the docket is the Game Boy Color. I'm gonna be straight up, not a big fan. I think as far as gaming history goes, this is a very iconic console. I think it did a lot for handheld gaming. It's super cool to have in my collection, to say I have one, but I rarely play this. I've probably played this like maybe 15 times since I've had it. I've had this for probably over 10 years now. So first things first, I'll give points where it's due. It feels comfortable in my hand. I don't really get cramps from playing it. It's there. It feels good. My main gripe with it, where I have to dock points, is no light on the screen. So even though it feels comfortable, you're constantly always trying to either be hunched over, or you're always aiming, you know, for light on the screen, which is, I don't know, it's a really big drawback, which I feel like, you know, a lot of earlier consoles had. But what's funny is the original Game Boy didn't have that. I mean, granted, sure, it was just like a green light in the screen, but I mean, they had the Game Boy Light, which came out, I want to say, a couple months before the Game Boy Color, and like, I don't understand why this didn't have a light in the screen. If it had a light in the screen, I could actually see myself going back and playing the few games I like on the Game Boy Color on this. But that leads me into the other fucking thing why I'm not a huge fan of the Game Boy Color, is the game lineup, pretty underwhelming. I understand for the time it might have been good, but for me personally, outside of the Pokemon games, Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Ages, there really isn't much on here for me to enjoy and play. And also, if you were to go back and play Game Boy Color games, there's better ways to experience them and play them. So Game Boy Color, I'm gonna give a 2.5. I really, like I said, super cool to have in the collection, but not really something I ever revisit. It really just sits on the shelf to say it's there, part of the collection. Sorry to my Game Boy Color fans out there, but I'm not a super huge fan of this system. Next on the list, we have probably my favorite, the Game Boy Advance. Now this is fucking amazing. First of all, again, feels great in my hands. Like, all the buttons feel super comfortable. The screen is much larger. Especially if you compare the screen on the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance. We got a lot more to work with here, and I don't know, I just love this console. This was also the very first console I got as a kid. It was completely my own. Maybe that has something to do with why I like it so much, but this also just feels so perfect. Like, even the triggers, everything, the way it's shaped feels really good for holding it. I love the Game Boy Advance. I will say, have to dock some points because, again, no light in the screen. I know you can mod backlights into these screens, but not having one off the get-go, especially when before it came a light in the screen, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But either way, the Game Boy Advance is amazing. But what it lacks in a backlight in the screen, it more than makes up for in the game library. We're talking Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Leaf Green, Fire Red, all the Dragon Ball games, Metroid. They even have a Mario Kart on here. Not the greatest Mario Kart, but still, the game library on the Game Boy Advance goes so crazy. Like, we have Fire Emblem. Like, I could keep going and going and going. The Game Boy Advance library is one of the best libraries ever, to the point where I'm still going back and recollecting games from our childhood just to play on this. We're gonna rank the Game Boy Advance. I'm torn between a 4.5 or a 5, because the light being on the screen, or there not being a backlight, really holds me back. I will say, you can get a light that you plug into here or that clips on that shines a light at the screen, which does the job, but you're gonna get glare, so it is what it is. But I think that this feels a lot more comfortable than the next one we're gonna review, which was the upgrade to the Game Boy Advance. I think we're gonna sit at a 4.5, just because as much as I like it and as much as I think it's much more comfortable than the SP, I normally find myself going to the SP, so 4.5 on this. And then we'll say this is normally what I come back to when I'm playing Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Color games, or Game Boy games, is the Game Boy Advance SP, because guess what? For the first time, we got a fucking backlight. I love the Game Boy SP. It's really, the Advance SP is like kind of what everybody wanted, but for me, I will say the only thing about this compared to the other two is I tend to get cramps if I'm playing it for too long. I feel like everything is kind of squished too much together. The Game Boy Color was just a little bit thicker, and I think that gave it a bit more of a form factor. That's kind of the thing with me when it comes to handheld gaming, is sometimes I'll get cramps in my hands. I also have like really big hands, so holding it like this feels weird, and if I do this, they're automatically pressing the triggers. So the one drawback to the SP for me is how it feels in my hands. It's not the most comfortable, but that being said, it plays most games fine, especially if I'm playing like a Pokemon or something. Now, if I'm playing something that's trigger reliant, that's where more of my cramps are going to come from. That being said, though, this is 9 times out of 10 when I come back to play anything from the Game Boy library, I'm doing it on this. The backwards compatibility, the light in the screen, everything's just so great. And also, look at how fucking great this looks. Like, it's just so amazing. Like, they really peaked with this. I do wish it was a little bit better in the hands, but outside that, I think I spend a lot of time coming back to this. Especially recently, I've come back. I played Legacy of Goku, Boo's Fury. I played Metroid Fusion. I've been playing Pokemon on this. I come back to this quite often, especially considering most times I'm playing a handheld game. Me and my girl are in bed, we're watching something on TV, and that's kind of when we'll bust out the handhelds and we'll start playing, right? So, we're also going to give it a 4.5. I was torn, I wanted to give it a 5, but at the end of the day, I think the form, my hands cramping, really takes it away from me. So we're going to go 4.5 on the Game Boy Advance SP. And then, this is something I put together myself. If you don't know what a Game Boy... There's Game Boy Micro, I'm pretty sure is what it calls, but then there's the Game Boy Macro, which is basically, you take a Nintendo DS and you simply remove the top screen. You do a little bit of wiring inside, and there's different ways you can go about it. For me personally, I wired mine. I put one of the speakers from the top screen right behind the stylus, and I removed the case, so I actually have sound on mine. You also have to go in before you take it apart and set it to automatically load the cartridge that whatever's in. So the moment you put a Game Boy game in, you don't have to go to the screen. It will automatically just load. I don't think I have a Game Boy Advance cartridge on me, because if I try to turn it on right now, it'll just do this. Oh, I don't even think it'll turn on. Yeah, it'll quickly flash. But if there's a Game Boy game in the bottom cart, it will load it, no problems. I went in, I took out the two things for these buttons and I put them down, so it's just the A and the B. You can actually go online and buy cases specifically, like shells specifically to make this, because there's different ways to do it. In the dark, this will actually light up green. This is literally just a clear straw, but if it was dark in here and I went to turn it on, this all lights up green because there's like a little wire in here that does it. I'm a really big fan of this. I think that this feels better than the SP, and the screen is actually great. The only downside to this is, obviously, if you know anything about the DS Lite, the cartridge sticks out a little bit, but putting this together was super fun. Learning how the DS Lite is wired and having to like solder certain things, and like soldering the speaker cable and just working with the insides was a super fun experience, and then being able to actually play games on something I made is really cool and fun. So I'm a really big fan of this. And also, if you are looking into making one of these, the tutorials are super easy to follow along with. You don't need crazy soldering skill, and you can actually do it without soldering, you just won't have sound. That's kind of the cool thing about this, is when you're doing it, you have options to upgrade this or upgrade that or do whatever you want. So I decided to take mine up a notch, and I already had a little bit of soldering experience, so I said, fuck it, I'm gonna try to put one of the speakers in, and it worked, and it's super cool. I would give this a 5, just based off the fact that we're losing a lot of backwards compatibility. We can't run Game Boy Color or Game Boy games on it. We can only run Game Boy Advance, but again, that library is crazy. This feels amazing in my hand. The experience of making it was great. Backlight in the screen. I don't go back to this as often as I do the SP, but that's just because I got the Rayquaza SP and I was like, okay, I gotta use it. But I do go back to this. The only other downside is, obviously, you don't have a link cable spot, but you pair everything that you do have with it, on top of the fact that it's got a crazy battery life because it's not supporting the top screen. Like, this will literally last like 10-15 hours just on nonstop. Like, I remember when I first got it, I was playing a lot of it. I was playing it for probably 4 or 5 days, 4-hour sessions each day, and it just, before the battery even went red. So shout out Game Boy Macro. Definitely, if you enjoy like working with electronics and messing around with stuff, go make one. They're really cool, and you can get a DS with a broken top screen for very cheap. So I highly recommend making one of these. They're super fun. 5 stars, Game Boy Macro. And then we're gonna move in to the original Nintendo DS. Now, a lot of people don't like this. I actually got this last year. I grew up with the DS Lite, the white one, but this feels so much better in my hands. The screens are not as good, like as far as they're just, it's kind of like the Game Boy SP screen, where if you kind of do this, it doesn't feel as good the way the sight works, and the backlight isn't as strong. But it more than makes up for that in how well this feels in my hands. It's got a very similar feel to the Game Boy Advance. I like the fact that there's a volume slider, and it's here, and it's nice. I like the fact that there's a power button. I honestly just love this console. The only thing that sucks, and I can't really say this because it's hard to judge it on this, but I don't have a stylus on mine, and it is fucking impossible to find styluses for these. So I have to normally, if I'm playing a game, because this is the DS I actually revisit the most. For Game Boy Advance games, for DS games, everything, like, this is literally what I come back to. I actually recently, when I played through Pokemon Black 2, this is what I played it on the whole time. The screens don't really bother me, and it just feels so comfortable in my hand. I genuinely could play this for hours. The battery life on it, again, super amazing. I don't know if that's because the backlights aren't as strong or what it is, but the original Nintendo DS, super fire. I'm gonna give this 5 stars straight up. I love this console. It is so great. And the DS library also is probably what's aiding to that score. We're talking like Sonic Rush Adventure, all the Pokemon games. Again, like, the DS library is so large and so good. They even managed to put Metroid Prime on the DS, which, granted, it was really pushing it, but it's a solid title. So I don't know. Really big fan of this. 5 stars. Original Nintendo DS goes fire. For the second, I actually have 2 here because one of them is the revision of the other one. So this is the original Nintendo DS Lite, and this is the updated Nintendo DS Lite. Now, I don't know if there's actually any difference in the consoles. I know that they released these, and then they released these ones, and the whole console was black, and it was either red or blue on the top. Mine's blue. I have it in this cool Pokemon case. But I don't know if there was a battery life increase or what's going on. So I just wanted to say I have both. I actually have 4 Nintendo DS Lites, but for this I was just like, I'll bring these 2. But this was the first one, and if I'm just rating it off of what it is, I will say the thinness, I do get cramps after playing this for like 3 hours. But other than that, it feels very comfortable. The screens are fucking perfect. Like, they look great, they feel great, the light is amazing in them. Like I said, it's basically everything I'd say. Like, this is less of, because everything that I said about this, I'm gonna say about this. The only thing is, I don't think this is as comfortable in my hands, but it is a definite upgrade with the screens, and these styluses, a lot better. You can replace these, even though I don't have one in here. But I love the DS Lite. I'd honestly have to say I'm gonna give this a 5 too, just because the original DS and the DS Lite, I would find myself normally going back to this one, but for every reason I would go back to this one, I could name a really good thing about this one. And also, I grew up with this. This was the original one I played, so much like the Game Boy Advance, it's just kind of close to my heart. Also, the white ones. White was my color, apparently. I always wanted the black ones, but I always ended up with the white ones, so whatever. Actually, shout out to my brother Jacob. I don't have my childhood DS anymore. The top screen actually broke. He found this for me and replaced it for me, so shout out Jake if you're watching. Big love. So yeah, 5 on the Nintendo DS Lite. We're gonna hop into something a little bit different for the next consoles. These 2 consoles are not official, but rather I went through a phase where, this is before I was able to recollect some of this stuff. I wanted to get a console that could just play all my legally obtained ROMs from Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance. I just wanted a little emulator console. So the first one I picked up was actually this one, but we'll go into this one in a minute. This is the second one I picked up. I picked this one up about 2 years ago. Now, I know that there's ones that are in like the $200-300 range, but I didn't want to splurge that hard for an emulator console, especially one that I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of play from. I just kind of wanted something to, because I went back to school, I was like, hey, I want something to fuck around with on the bus, I want something just cool, so I'll pick something up. So I was kind of into these for a little while. This is the second one I picked up. It's called the X20 Mini. I got this on Amazon. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure you can pick these up anywhere, but this one is cool. The screen, I will say, very easy to get scratched, but as far as controls, I find there's a little bit of input delay on the menu. I don't know if you can see, but like, oh shit. It also does these pop-up things a lot. There's a tad of input delay on the menu, but what I will say is, when you're playing games on it, it feels pretty good for the most part. I like the fact that it is in widescreen. Some people don't like the stretch, but for me, I don't really mind. I actually got a decent amount of use out of this. I think this was like... Now again, I don't fully remember the story on this one, but I think it couldn't have been more than $60. The one thing that annoys me is when you go to play a game, it'll pull up this weird menu. It pulls up this menu every single time you go to play a game, and you gotta click restart. It also uses save states as your saves. So that's kind of a downfall. Not that I don't necessarily, like, I don't care about save states, but when that's the only way to save, it is kind of annoying. But as you can see, it plays really well. It loads the games. As I'm noticing now, there was a little bit of sound distortion, but most of the time I was playing this, I wasn't really using sound. It was really just on the bus ride to school. So I would give this a 3.5. It's cool if you want something that can play your ROMs that you legally obtained. This is probably the way to go. It's really cool. I just feel like this could be done much better. And I'm sure, like, I know there are really high-end emulator consoles, but I don't think an emulator console should cost a shitload of money. I think like 50 or 60 bucks for something that can run your emulators properly shouldn't be that crazy expensive. And I've looked at a couple that were like 200 bucks, 300 bucks. And there are some super cool ones that also run like PlayStation 1 and like 3DS in some cases, and DS, they have 2 screens and stuff. But for me personally, like, I really just wanted it for Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo and maybe some Sega stuff, so I didn't really want to go that far. At the end of the day, cool little console. It's basically a rip-off of a Switch Lite in its style, but it feels super comfortable in my hand. Like, it's got a joystick, all the buttons are here. Like, it is, honestly, as far as like just being like a little cool console, like, the screen's nice. I mean, playing it now, I noticed the sound was a little off, which would be a little annoying if I wanted that. But I'm giving it a 3.5 solely because of the save state stuff and the fact that it's got some crazy input lag only when you're in the menu. The games run perfectly fine, but other than that, I mean, I would not recommend this one if you were to go pick one up. However, then there's this one, and this one's kind of funny because when you boot it up, you get like this weird Street Fighter menu, and it gets their names wrong, and then it just goes through this like weird little intro thing. It does this every time you turn it on. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. That being said, once you get into it, this is probably one of the best. Like, there's, again, no input lag in here. Okay, this is what's really cool. So if I go into movies, I have all of Iron Blooded Orphans, the Gundam show, just on here. And I can just watch Mobile Suit Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans on this. Like, that is kind of crazy to me that I can do that on this thing. It comes with, I think it's 8 or 9 gigs of onboard storage. So unlike this one where I needed to put a memory card in, I forgot to mention that this is a micro SD in it. This one's got onboard storage. It runs all the same games. It runs them a lot better. And unfortunately, you are saving with save states still, but the menu is a lot more coherent. When you start the game will actually just start up and boot normally, and then you use save states from there, as opposed to when you start them on there, you have this weird input delay menu and whatever. This is called the MP5X7. At least that's what it says there. I've seen these all over Amazon. But yeah, I picked this up. I think this one was about 40 or 50 bucks. Might have been 60, I don't know. Picked it up off Amazon. It's got a really nice joystick. Feels perfect. It's literally just a Vita. Like, it's a PlayStation Vita in your hand. And it's super fucking comfortable. Like, I love everything about it. And there were some, like I said, the save state stuff and all that. So that's what made me lean into getting another one, because I wanted something that I could just play, no save states, whatever the hell. And there is one issue with this. I noticed it's only with Game Boy Advance, which is the main thing I got it for. It plays them a little bit faster, like not quite as if you had a speed mode on, but it runs them, I want to say, maybe 10 or 15 frames faster, and you can hear it in the music, and it doesn't really affect anything. Like, I don't think I would want to play Sonic because, you know, it's already a super fast-paced game, but it doesn't really affect anything. It's just as somebody who wanted to play the Game Boy Advance games in the way they were meant to be played, it was a little annoying, but I played through Fire Emblem 1, Sacred Stones, and an English translation for the Sacred Sword, which I think was the Japanese one, and it was great. I was playing through like a couple maps a night. I had a lot of fun with this. Like I said, what made me want to get another one and upgrade was the fact that there were like some slight issues with save states and whatnot. And whenever you go to order these, nobody talks about that in the reviews. So I don't know, but overall, I think this is a really cool little emulator console. I would highly recommend, if you're in the market for one of these and you want one that doesn't cost a ridiculous amount of money, this is probably the guy to go with. The screen's really well, like it works. I fully enjoy it. This is a really good, and I think it also has a filter on it that just makes the Game Boy Advance games look crisper. I don't know, that's just me, but I'm gonna give this a 4 because this is a pretty cool little console. I mess around with it, and the joystick feels really good too. And as far as the buttons go, like I said, it's a PSP Vita, but they don't feel, this feels cheap. This actually feels pretty high quality. Like, I'm surprised. But either way, we're gonna give it a 4. It's cool. Yeah, we'll give it a. Yeah, you know what? We'll. No, I'm gonna give it a straight 4. It's cool. Then we're gonna be moving to the DSi. I picked this up for $40 on Facebook Marketplace, and I'd never had one growing up. I just wanted one to aid out my collection. Everything I said about the DS Lite, it is a little bit slimmer, but you don't really feel it in your hands. I do get cramps if I'm playing it for too long, but it loses points solely because no Game Boy Advance support. The no Game Boy Advance support wrecks me. Like, maybe if I got this on launch and I got access to some of the DSiWare games, because I did not mod this, maybe I would be able to say this is better than the DS Lite, but the Game Boy Advance support was such a big part of the DS's appeal to me because I had Game Boy Advance, and then when I got the DS, I had access to all of these games I could keep playing, right? So I like this. I will say screens are a little bit bigger than on the DS Lite, and I will say I think it displays the games in a much higher quality. Like, they just look better. I don't know if this has OLED screens or what it is, but the colors are more vibrant. The game genuinely looks better on this than it does on this. And so some games, Game Boy Advance games, Nintendo DS games, I'll play on this just because I want to see how it looks, and I like the way it looks. But this doesn't get as much love as I would like to give it. One, because for whatever fucking reason, a couple months into getting it, my R trigger just stopped working, and I don't feel like opening it up because I've heard these are a bitch to open up and work with, which I actually know for a fact because my brother brought me 2 broken ones that I was trying to combine and fix, and between the ribbon cables and the amount of screw, I was so over it. But I'm gonna give this a 4.5 just because not having Game Boy Advance support takes away so much love for me, and it would make me rather just go back to this. If I'm playing a Nintendo DS game, sometimes I'll come to this, but like I said, the original DS just feels better in my hand, and I don't mind the screens, and I genuinely just like it, so I find myself going to this. So if I want to play a Game Boy Advance game with a really nice screen, 9 times out of 10 I don't really care about the screen. I'll just run to this, or sometimes this. If I'm playing a DS game, I normally lean to this. Occasionally I'll lean to this, but I never really find myself coming back to the DSi. I feel like it's cool. I like the fact that there's a menu and everything, but I gotta give it a 4.5 just because as cool as the system is and all the good, like, I would say it's a little bit of an upgrade to the DS Lite. I just genuinely don't like it as much. Though that being said, it is a cool little console, and every now and then I'll be like, fuck it, I'm gonna run it on the DS Lite as long as I don't need a trigger. Mainly a Pokemon if I'm playing Pokemon. Recently I did a Shiny Week on stream, and I was playing a lot of Pearl off of this, but Either way, moving on, the 3DS. Now, I have mixed feelings about the 3DS. I will point out and say very quickly, I don't have the XL consoles. I've never really felt a need to get them. At some point, I might try to get one, but this is my very first 3DS that I got. As far as a Pokemon player, these are amazing. Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, X, Y, Moon, Sun, Ultra Moon. Good games. I enjoy them. Except for Sun and Moon. Ultra Sun and Moon did it better, but whatever. We're not going to get into that. As far as the rest of the library, it's really hit or miss. I think Metroid Samus Returns is cool. I think Fire Emblem's cool. There are a decent amount of titles on here. But if I'm going to play Ocarina of Time, I genuinely would rather play the collector's version for the GameCube. Because I think the 3D is cool. I think I played through Ocarina of Time 3D one time. It was cool. It was a nice experience. The graphical upgrade, the 3D, it was cool. But I would never go back and play it again. And the same thing goes with the Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask, in my opinion, they completely botched because just the edits they did to the bosses and shit. I don't like Majora's Mask 3D, but that's just me. The 3DS library is so weird, hit or miss for me. I know there was like a lot of cool games like Luigi's Mansion for the 3DS, but I was never really super big fan of Luigi's Mansion, so never got it, never cared. Like I said, there were some cool games, but at the end of the day, the library does not hit as hard as this library. But what is on here is actual gold. I'll give it points where it's due. I'm not a huge Animal Crossing fan, but I've heard people say that the best Animal Crossing in existence is on this. Tomodachi Life, I've heard super good. So I know there's a bunch of good games outside of the ones that I personally like on here, and that's why I'm not going to fully just be like, the library is trash, there's nothing there. There is a lot there. On top of that, you have virtual console stuff, which I think is really cool. I actually went through and I replayed Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Silver, Pokemon Crystal, and also you get access to Pokemon Bank, which allows you to transfer those Pokemon into the 3DS games, which I also thought was really cool. So because of all that, and I think the actual proper eShop being on here, I know there was one on the DSi, but I can't speak to that because I never got to experience it. But I did get to experience the eShop on here, and I will say, all things considered, I would feel comfortable giving this like a nice 5, because I think the screens are nice. I enjoy the joystick, feels really good, even if I'm playing like a 2D game. Like I instantly lean to this. I will say the D-pad is positioned weirdly. If I am using the D-pad, now that I think about it, I'm probably just using the joystick because of where it's placed, and it feels more comfortable than reaching down here. But overall, I also like the customability of like getting themes for the system, all that type of stuff. I genuinely like the 3DS. Last game I was playing was Pokemon Ultra Moon. Actually, yeah, I was playing that for Shiny Week. I figured out a way to get it to run on my computer, but yeah, 3DS, I'm gonna give a 5. I think it's a cool console. Maybe if I got the XL and I started playing on the XL, I might give it a 5.5, but at the end of the day, I don't really think... part of the reason I never invested in a 3DS XL is, at the time, outside of Pokemon, I wasn't playing anything on here. It wasn't until later that I picked up a couple other games like Mario Maker, which I'll never play again, and we'll get into that in a minute for the next thing we're reviewing. But there were some other games that I picked up on here, like New Super Mario Bros. 2. That was actually pretty cool. Metroid Samus Returns, the Fire Emblem games. I think they did a Phoenix Wright trilogy on here. Just a bunch of really cool games. I don't have too much to say about it. I will say it is a genuine upgrade to the Nintendo DS, but its backwards compatibility is interesting because you can play original Nintendo DS games on here, but unlike the DSi that displays them at a much better resolution and colorful screen than the DS, this makes them look worse than they look on this. In fact, this makes them look worse than they look on this. I think playing a Nintendo DS game on here it's a disgrace like, why would you actually want to play an original Nintendo DS game on a 3DS? It looks like trash. It is my least favorite way to play Nintendo DS games. I would rather play them on an emulator on my computer and use the fucking mouse as a stylus. Like, that is how bad they look on here, and I just don't like them. Like, I will say, the joystick is kind of nice, especially if I'm playing something like Mario Kart DS, but I would rather just use the D-pad. I think not great. Which brings us to the next console, which you might argue this isn't a handheld, but I genuinely use it as a handheld more than I do on my TV. Now, granted, you can't bring this with you everywhere because it needs to be within range of your console to even be played, but we're gonna review it anyway. It's the Wii U. I'm saying straight off the bat, I like this more than the Switch, for two reasons. One, this feels so good in my hand. These grips, I can play this for hours, zero cramping. Some Wii U titles are just so good. I know a lot of people hate the Wii U. I love the Wii U. I am one of its biggest supporters. I might be its sole supporter. I love this. I think the Virtual Console, the reason I don't have a Nintendo 64 is because every game that I would want on Nintendo 64 is on here, and I actually like the controller. You can play Game Boy Advance games on this, which I think look amazing. You can play Nintendo DS games on here, which some people say they don't like, but I'll tell you right now, I love playing Nintendo DS games on this. In fact, I played a stylus-intensive game on this. I beat Phantom Hourglass, Zelda, on this. I've played Pokemon Ranger on this. I've played countless games. Like, for really good example, a lot of times, I play my Game Boy Advance games on the SP. Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission are eShop available, and I genuinely think this is my preferred way to play them. I think everything about the Wii U, the way its controller is, the way the joysticks, like everything about this is so perfect. I love the Wii U. I'm giving this a 5.5. The only thing that holds it back from being a perfect 6 is the fact that, like, I can't take this with me on the bus or on a road trip, which, I mean, the bus, no, but you could technically find a way to plug your Wii U into a car and play it portably, I guess. If you were, I guess, at an airport or anything, I guess you could technically find a wallet and plug the Wii U in and then play off the gamepad. But I love the Wii U. This is probably one of my favorite consoles. I love this thing to death. I never had one growing up. I actually picked this up a year and a half ago, and ever since I got it, it's been one of my go-tos. I love this thing. Also, you should mod it. Because, just saying, don't at me, Nintendo. And then that leads us to our final, which is the Switch. But before I get into this, I just want to say, working on getting a PlayStation Portable, which I had, but long story short, my mom and grandma sold it at a yard sale. They tell me they didn't. I know they did. It is what it is. I'll get a new one. But that's why I'm not reviewing it. I had one growing up, and then I also had another one in my teen years. I originally had I believe it was the 2000, and then I got the upgraded one, the slimmer one. Maybe the slimmer one was the 2000. I don't remember. Either way, I've had both models of the PSP, and I have a lot to say about that system. I really like it. But I don't have one now, so we're not reviewing it. And I've never had a Vita, but I'm debating on getting one. My thing is I kind of want to get the PlayStation Home, which is just a Vita you can plug into your TV. But then I'm also like, ooh, I like handhelds. It's a whole thing. Anyways, moving on to the Switch. I have mixed feelings about this console. So first things first, it's not in here, but I felt like it wouldn't be right to review it with it on. I have one of the really big Hori pads. It's not the ones you clip onto the side. It's a whole one unit that you clip into it, and it gives you like a controller grip, which leads into the fact that I hate this. I don't like the Joy-Cons. I feel like everything is too scrambled. We don't have a fucking D-pad, and also drift Like, there's so much wrong with the Joy-Cons. Also, the whole thing is just way too skinny for my hands. I find myself getting cramps if I play it for too long, which is a big thing for handheld gaming for me. Is sure, it's portable, but like, do I want to play it in my hand for hours, right? Like, and with this, for me, until I got that controller grip, I didn't. I mainly played my Switch docked, and this was less of a handheld console for me and more just a home console. It wasn't until I actually got the controller grip thing that I started playing a lot of my games that I felt more comfortable with a controller for me like this, because I felt like I had a fucking controller in my hand. And for example, like Gundam Breaker 4, Sonic Frontiers, Breath of the Wild, Smash Bros. Like, these are all games that I didn't feel comfortable playing in handheld mode, and now I can do it for sure. But I only got my controller grip last summer, so I haven't had a lot of time, and a lot of games I haven't revisited Breath of the Wild with my thing, you know what I mean? So and I also felt like if I was gonna review this, not everyone's gonna have one of those. Those are pricey. I think I paid $70 for mine. So most people are just gonna have Joy-Cons. So review it like this. And I know you can get grips for them, but I'm just reviewing it straight like this and just straight like this. This does not feel comfortable in my hand to play, unless I'm playing something bare minimum like Pokemon, like something very basic, very, you know what I mean? So not super great. Right away. That being said, screen, amazing. Battery life has dwindled over the years, but it's still pretty good. Like, I can still get like 4 or 5 hours out of it. So that's pretty good. And that probably has something to do with the fact that I know, like, originally it was probably 8 hours, but I spent a lot of its time docked, and I'm sure that did something to the battery. The game lineup is pretty fucking good. I mean, we got really high quality Smash Bros. We got Breath of the Wild. Basically, every Switch game you can play portably, and I think they look great. A lot of people complain about how they look, but it's like, brother, when you grow up playing this and Pokemon Red and Blue, this looks amazing, okay? I don't know if you've noticed from my collection, I'm kind of a Nintendo guy, so I don't really mind the way games look on the Switch. I'd have to give the Switch a 5. I like my Wii U more. And that's mainly because it feels better in my hands. I will say the Wii U's lacking on certain games. There are games that are obviously only available on Switch, but we still have Mario Kart 8, Mario Maker. Like there's a lot of games. And what I will say is a decent portion of the Switch's library was them re-releasing Wii U games onto the Switch. Which is fine. I don't hate that. I just, like I said, I would much prefer playing the Wii U. Now, I know you could make the argument, well, just dock it, play it, you like that. Yes, but I'm rating this on handheld experience and handheld experience only. And as a handheld, I think unless you get a grip or you get something for it, it doesn't feel very good as a handheld. Is it capable? Yes. Can it play the games? Yes. But not as comfortably or as good as some of these other consoles. Like, I would literally argue this feels better in my hands than this does. And this is like some third-party Chinese electronics. This is a fucking Nintendo supplied thing, and I understand, like, it's got to be sleek and it's whatever. I'm not hating on it. I just personally, I could probably get like 2 hours of playing Pokemon on this before I get this cramp right here in my hand. And when it comes to like actual intense games, like for example Outer Worlds, Dying Light, Sonic Frontiers, or like something that's like kind of like controller heavy, like this is not a ideal setup to be playing on. So the Nintendo Switch, I'm gonna give a regular 5 because I think the library slaps. I think overall, like, I think the console itself slaps. Like, we have a Sweet eShop. There's a lot of good games on here. I think the only thing really holding it back is the slimness, and I think that should reflect in something where, like, this I give a 4.5. This is a 5. I still think it's really, really good, but I don't think it's as good as the Wii U as far as being a handheld goes. No 6s, but we don't have a PSP in our hands yet. That's something I'll say. If I get a PSP, I will go through and I'll do an update part to this video. I think the PSP and potentially the PlayStation Vita are maybe some of the greatest handhelds ever, especially if you mod them. Because if you mod them, you're no longer just running Sony's games for the console. At that point, you have quite possibly the best emulator console ever. It's just been a matter of like I can't find a PSP for like a decent price. And if I'm gonna have to spend like fucking 150 on a PSP, it better be one of the ones I really want. Like the one that my mom and grandma sold was the silver one. If I'm gonna have to fork over for a PSP, I want the blue one, or I want the Darth Vader one, or I want one of the nicer ones, right? I don't just want the basic black one if I'm actually gonna be, or like the pink one looks really cool too. Anyways, I don't have the PSP in my hands, so I'm not gonna rate it. Really quickly before we end, I said I'd go over my favorite consoles out of all of these, regardless of rating. I probably have to say the Wii U is number one. I love this to death. My second favorite one would probably be the original Nintendo DS, and my third favorite would be the Game Boy Advance. And that's just straight nostalgia. Like I said, I normally play this or the Wii U for Game Boy Advance games, but it's either this or the Wii U, or even sometimes this DS here. But this is a special spot in my heart. So, would definitely say this is the third. This is the second, and the Wii over here is the first. I still like and play some of these other consoles. Like I just have a really big knack for collecting. Also, low key, just throwing it out there, if you mod these, it's very easy. If I didn't have this, because like I said, I got this, I think it was last summer. This probably would have been the third, and the Game Boy Advance would have been second, because you can do a lot with this if it's modded. You emulator it up and it runs pretty clean, and having games magically appear on it is pretty cool and gives you access to actually go around and try some of the library, especially considering, if you don't know, retro collecting is getting very expensive, especially for these consoles in particular. The consoles end up being cheaper than the games in a lot of cases, but I personally have such love for retro handheld consoles and just gaming in general, especially retro gaming. Like right now I'm playing through the Metroid series. I played Zero Mission, Super Metroid. I'm currently playing Prime. And I have like a really love for classic gaming, especially when it comes to Nintendo and Sony's earlier shit. So I just figured I'd go through this. I need to make a new video to upload anyway. Peace out. Thanks for watching. This is a lot longer than I thought it would be.